I never imagined it would be my own son who would break the news. The room was dimly lit, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor as I walked in. Jason sat at the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the wall. His silence was unsettling. Normally, he'd be chattering away about school or his latest video game. But today was different. I could feel it. "Dad," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I saw Mom today, with Coach Evan." I froze. My mind raced, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "At tennis practice?" I asked, feigning ignorance, though I could sense the weight behind his words. He shook his head slowly, his eyes dropping to the floor. "It didn't look like practice, Dad. They were together." Together. The word hit me like a punch in the gut. I stood there, trying to process what Jason had just said. My hands tightened into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to scare him. He was just a kid. He shouldn't have to carry this. "What exactly did you see, Jason?" My voice cracked, betraying my emotions. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to relive the moment. "They were hugging, and Mom, she looked really happy." "It didn't feel right, Dad. It was like they forgot anyone could see them." My stomach twisted. Sophie, my wife of 15 years, with her tennis coach. I tried to find some explanation, something that could make sense of what Jason had seen, but deep down, I already knew the truth. I'd felt it for months. The late nights, the extra training sessions, the sudden emotional distance between us. It had all been there, but I had chosen to ignore it. "Thanks for telling me, Jason," I said, kneeling down to his level. "I'm really proud of you for being honest." He nodded, but the sadness in his eyes told me he knew things were about to change. I hugged him tightly, trying to keep the rising anger from consuming me. I couldn't let Jason see me fall apart. Not yet. As he retreated to his room, I stood up and walked to the window. Staring out at the backyard, my mind churned, and my pulse pounded in my ears. I needed to be sure. I couldn't confront Sophie without proof. If Jason was right, and I feared he was, I had to catch her in the act. That night, as Sophie came home from another session at the tennis club, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile as radiant as ever, and I forced myself to smile back. I could still smell the faint scent of fresh-cut grass on her clothes. The scent that used to remind me of summer afternoons spent watching her play. Now it just made me sick. I waited for days, replaying Jason's words in my mind, planning my next move. And then, one afternoon, I followed her. I parked the car a few blocks away from the tennis club and slipped into the shadows near the court, watching from a distance. There they were, Sophie and Evan, laughing, touching. The way she looked at him was the same way she used to look at me. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and hit record. I captured every moment, their playful banter, the secret glances, the embrace that confirmed what I had been too blind to see. In that instant, everything changed. There was no going back now. I had my proof, and I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I sat at the kitchen table, the video still fresh on my phone, burning a hole in my pocket like a ticking bomb. The house was quiet, the kids were asleep, and Sophie was in the living room, curled up with a book like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. For her, for me, for all of us. And she didn't even know it yet. I stared at her from across the room, my mind reeling with questions I didn't want answers to. How long had it been going on? Did it start innocently, or was it always something more? What did she see in him? I wanted to lash out, to demand an explanation, to make her feel the pain that had been eating away at me since Jason's words first shattered our world. But I wasn't ready to lose control. Not yet. "Sophie," I said, my voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the silence. She glanced up from her book, her eyes meeting mine with that familiar softness that used to calm me. Now, it just made my blood boil. "Yeah?" she asked, closing the book slowly. I could see the faint flicker of concern in her eyes, like she sensed something was coming, but wasn't sure what. "I need to ask you something," I said, leaning forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "How are things going with tennis? I mean, with Evan?" Her eyes darted to the side for a split second, the kind of move only someone guilty would make. It was subtle, but it was enough. "Things are fine," she replied, a little too quickly. "Why do you ask?" I felt my pulse quicken. The lies were so easy for her now. Effortless. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I continued, keeping my tone calm, though my heart was racing. "You've been spending a lot of time at the club. Late nights, extra practices. It's not like you. I paused, watching her face. Is there something you want to tell me? Sophie shifted in her seat, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She smiled, but it was strained, forced. What do you mean? There's nothing going on, Lucas. I'm just busy with tennis. That's all. There it was. Another lie. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me explode. Not yet. Busy with tennis, I repeated, nodding slowly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen still lit up with the video I'd recorded. I placed it on the table between us, the image of her and Evan in each other's arms frozen on the screen. What about this? I asked, my voice cold and even. The color drained from her face as she looked at the screen, her eyes widening in shock. She didn't reach for the phone. She didn't even try to deny it. For a moment, there was just silence. The kind of silence that suffocates. Lucas, she began, but I cut her off. Don't, I snapped, my voice sharper now. Don't insult me by trying to explain this away. Jason saw you. I saw you. And now everyone's going to see it. Her eyes filled with panic, and she reached across the table toward me, her voice shaking. Please, Lucas, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I interrupted, standing up from the table, towering over her. Don't you dare try to twist this around? Do you think I'm stupid? You think I haven't noticed the late nights? The way you've been pulling away from me, from the kids? I've been a fool, Sophie. But not anymore. She stared up at me, her face pale, tears beginning to well in her eyes. Lucas, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened. I scoffed, shaking my head. It didn't just happen. You let it happen. You chose him, over me, over our family. And now you're going to face the consequences. Lucas, please, she pleaded, standing up, trying to reach for me again. But I stepped back, my hand clenched around the phone. It's too late, I said, my voice cold. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I turned and walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I headed upstairs to check on Jason and Lily, watching them sleep peacefully, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I stood there in the doorway, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. But I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. The moment I pressed that send button, there'd be no going back. The world would know what kind of man Evan was, what kind of wife Sophie had become, and they'd lose everything. It was time for the truth to come out. The fallout was swift. It was almost surreal how quickly everything spiraled out of control after I pressed that button. I sat in my car, parked just outside the tennis club, watching the chaos unfold through my phone screen. The video I had sent to the club's social media page was now being shared, liked, and commented on by everyone in our tight-knit community. It didn't take long before Evan's name was dragged through the mud. Clients began pulling their children from his classes. Comments flooded in, calling him a homewrecker, calling Sophie a disgrace. I watched it all with a cold detachment, feeling no remorse. This was the justice they both deserved. It wasn't until the phone calls started that I truly realized the magnitude of what I had done. Sophie's first call came late that evening. I didn't answer. What was there to say? She tried a few more times. But when I ignored those, too, the texts began flooding in. Lucas, please call me. I'm begging you. We need to talk. You can't do this. Please, think about the kids. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. Please, let's fix this. Fix it? There was no fixing what she had broken. She had destroyed us the moment she let herself fall into Evan's arms. The video was only a mirror reflecting the truth for the world to see. The next day, I dropped Jason and Lily off at school as if it were any other day. Pretending everything was normal. They sensed something was off, but I kept it together for their sake. No matter how much pain Sophie had caused me, the kids were still innocent. I'd protect them from the ugliness of this situation for as long as I could. As I drove away from the school, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Sophie. It was Evan. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse quicken. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear whatever pathetic excuse or plea he was going to make. But I couldn't stomach the thought of hearing his voice. Not now. I let the call go to voicemail, but the sight of his name flashing on my phone was like a slap in the face. I knew I wasn't done with him yet. Instead, I headed back to the club, where the aftermath of the video had hit full force. From the parking lot, I could see the tension in the air. Groups of parents stood near the entrance, whispering among themselves. Evan's name was on everyone's lips, and it wasn't in praise. I parked and stepped out, making my way toward the front doors. As soon as I walked in, I spotted him. Evan stood near the reception desk, his face pale and drawn, eyes darting nervously as he tried to answer the receptionist's questions. He looked up and saw me, and for a second, his face flashed with something that could have been guilt, or maybe it was fear. He didn't come toward me. He just stood there, frozen, like he knew he had no words that could make this right. I walked straight up to him, every muscle in my body tensing, but I kept my voice low, my anger tightly controlled. I see you're still trying to salvage what's left of your career. He swallowed hard, not meeting my gaze. Lucas, listen, No, you listen, I cut him off, stepping closer, my voice cold. You knew exactly what you were doing. You went after my wife, you went after my family, and now you're paying for it. His eyes flickered with desperation. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Sophie and we didn't mean for it to get this far. I laughed bitterly. Right, it's always an accident, isn't it? A mistake that just happens to ruin people's lives. Look, I'll leave the club, Evan said quickly. I'll quit. You'll never see me again, I swear. Just, please don't take this any further. It's my career, my livelihood. I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words, but there wasn't an ounce of sympathy left in me. He had taken so much from me, my trust, my marriage, my peace of mind. And now he wanted mercy? No, I said, my voice hard and unyielding. You don't get to walk away from this clean. You wrecked my life. Now, I'm making sure you lose everything, just like I did. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, speechless. I had no idea what he would do next, but I didn't care. My focus wasn't on him anymore. It was on what came next for me and my children. By the time I got home, the house felt emptier than usual. Sophie hadn't come back last night, and I hadn't expected her to. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers that lay before me. I had already filled them out and signed my name, and now all that was left was to file them. It felt like the final step in severing the last thread that connected us. As I looked out the window, I couldn't help but wonder what Sophie was doing at that exact moment. Where she was she thinking about me? About Jason and Lily? Did she understand the full scope of what she had done? I reached for my phone. Not to call her, but to check the message from my lawyer. Custody. Full custody. I had won. A part of me felt hollow. It wasn't just the marriage that was over, it was the life we had built together. But now, at least, I had my children, and with that, a chance to rebuild. Sophie had made her bed. Now she'd have to lie in it. The weeks that followed felt like living in the eye of a storm. Everything outside my world was still spinning, but inside, there was only quiet. Too quiet. Sophie hadn't returned home since the night of our confrontation. At first, I wondered if she was with Evan, but the word around town made it clear that wasn't the case. Evan had been fired from the tennis club within days of the video going viral. The parents wanted him out, and the club couldn't afford the scandal. He'd lost most of his clients, and I heard through some mutual acquaintances that he'd packed up and left town. Sophie, though, was still around. I hadn't seen her, but word travels fast in a small community like ours. She'd been staying at a friend's place. And every now and then, I'd get a text from her, always trying to reach out, trying to talk. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I had nothing left to say. My focus now was on Jason and Lily. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they felt the shift. They asked about their mom, of course, why she wasn't home when she'd be back, but I didn't have answers for them. I told them the truth in bits and pieces. Mom had made some bad decisions, and things between us had changed. It was a tough line to walk. I didn't want to hurt them by dragging them into our mess, but they were smart kids. They could see the cracks. At night, after they were asleep, I'd lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had all fallen apart so quickly. 15 years of marriage, and it had unraveled in just a few short weeks. I couldn't help but replay every moment, trying to find where it had all gone wrong. Was there something I missed? Something I could have done differently? But then I'd remember the video, the way Sophie had looked at Evan, the way they laughed together like I didn't even exist, and the guilt would dissolve, replaced by anger. I didn't want to feel like this forever. The bitterness, the resentment, it was exhausting. But every time I thought I was ready to move forward, I'd remember what she'd done, and it would pull me right back under. One afternoon, after picking the kids up from school, I got a call from my lawyer. The divorce was moving quickly. Faster than I had expected, really. The full custody agreement had been approved, and the divorce papers were nearly finalized. Sophie hadn't fought me on anything, not the custody, not the house. Maybe she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on. Or maybe she was just too broken by everything to care anymore. Either way, it didn't matter. This was my life now. Just me and the kids. A part of me wanted to feel triumphant. I'd won, after all. I had everything that mattered. But as I sat at the kitchen table, watching Jason and Lily doing their homework, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like survival. The day I finally saw Sophie again came unexpectedly. I had been avoiding her for weeks, shutting down every attempt she made to reach me. But one Saturday morning, I found her standing on the doorstep when I opened the front door to get the mail. She looked different, tired, like the weight of what had happened had finally sunk in. Her clothes hung a little looser, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. "Lucas," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" I wanted to slam the door in her face. To shut her out the way I had been doing for weeks. But something in the way she looked, so fragile, so lost, stopped me. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let her in. Sophie walked into the living room, glancing around as if she wasn't sure she belonged there anymore. Maybe she didn't. This was my home now, my space with the kids. The life we had shared was gone, and she was an outsider. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I stayed standing, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. "I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. For everything. I know I ruined our marriage, I know I hurt you, and the kids. I wasn't thinking. She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And I've lost everything because of it." I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure if I could speak without my anger rising to the surface again. But as I looked at her, sitting there in pieces, I realized something. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. I was still angry, sure. Hurt. But the hatred, the need for revenge, had burned itself out. "You didn't just ruin our marriage, Sophie," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. "You wrecked our family. You wrecked yourself. And for what? For some fling with a tennis coach?" She flinched at my words, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, her eyes cast down, tears spilling over onto her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "I can't take any of it back. But I need to try and make things right. I want to be there for Jason and Lily. They're my children, Lucas. I can't lose them." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, she was still their mother. And deep down, I knew Jason and Lily needed her, too. They missed her, even if they didn't fully understand why she wasn't around. "You already lost them, Sophie," I said, my voice quieter now. "You gave them up when you chose Evan. When you chose yourself over this family." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy, I'll get help. I just need a chance to fix this. Please." I stared at her for a long moment, my mind racing with everything that had happened. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again. But as much as I wanted to shut her out completely, I couldn't. Jason and Lily deserved better than that. They deserved both of their parents, even if things would never be the same. "I don't know if you can fix this," I said finally, my voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "But for the kids' sake, I'll let you try." She nodded, wiping away her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't say anything more. There was nothing left to say. The weeks that followed were a blur of awkward silences and tentative steps toward some semblance of normalcy. Sophie was allowed to see Jason and Lily on weekends, and while the arrangement was tense at first, it eventually became routine. She'd pick them up in the mornings, and they'd spend the day doing the usual family activities, parks, movies, ice cream. But they always came back to me at night, their home with me feeling like the only thing that still made sense in the chaos. Sophie and I barely spoke during these exchanges. Every word felt loaded, every look tense, as if we were both waiting for the other to say something that would set off another explosion. I avoided being around when she picked up the kids, finding reasons to be in the garage or out in the yard. I couldn't handle seeing her for more than a few minutes at a time. The sight of her still triggered something deep inside me, a mixture of resentment, sadness, and a kind of hollow emptiness I couldn't shake. But the kids seemed happier. And for that, I was willing to endure the discomfort. I couldn't punish them for what Sophie had done, and in the end, that was what mattered the most. One Sunday evening, Jason came back from one of his visits unusually quiet. He was normally chatty after spending time with his mom, full of stories about their day together. But this time, he climbed out of the car without a word, walking straight into the house without even looking at me. I followed him inside, concerned. "Jason, what's wrong?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing." I knelt down beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, you know you can talk to me, right? If something's bothering you, I want to know." He hesitated for a moment, then looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, is it true that you and Mom aren't ever getting back together?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't realized just how much hope he'd been holding on to. It was easy to forget that while I was dealing with my own pain, the kids were dealing with their own version of it, too. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain it in a way that made sense to him. "Jason, your mom and we've been through some really hard things. Sometimes, even when people love each other, they can't stay together. It doesn't mean we don't love you and Lily. It just means we're going to be living in two different places now." "But why?" he asked, his voice small. "Why can't you just forgive her?" His words hung in the air like a weight I wasn't prepared for. I wanted to tell him it was more complicated than that forgiveness wasn't enough to fix what had been broken. But how could I explain that to an 8-year-old? I pulled him into a hug, hoping that, somehow, the warmth of that embrace would communicate what my words couldn't. "I'm always going to be here for you, no matter what. Your mom will too. We both love you more than anything." Jason nodded against my chest, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. Maybe he never would. I barely understood it myself. As the months passed, life found a new rhythm. It wasn't the life I had imagined for us. But it was a life nonetheless. Jason and Lily settled into the routine of splitting their time between me and Sophie, and for the most part, they seemed to be adjusting. I threw myself into my work, into being the best father I could be, trying to fill the void that Sophie's betrayal had left behind. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers that had been finalized just days before. The ink was barely dry, but the reality of it was already settling in. The life I had built with Sophie was officially over. We were no longer husband and wife, just two people trying to co-parent as best as we could. I should have felt relief. The endless back and forth, the tension, the anger, it was all behind me now. But instead, I felt hollow, like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a void with no clear way forward. It was strange, being alone like this. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being a husband and a father. And now, half of that was gone. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a moment before getting up to answer it. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Sophie standing there, her face pale and drawn, just like the day she had first asked to talk. "Lucas," she said quietly. Can we talk?" I hadn't seen her outside of the kids' pickups and drop-offs in months. I hadn't wanted to, but there was something different about her now. She didn't look desperate or broken. She just looked tired. I stepped aside, letting her in without a word. We stood there in the living room for a few moments, neither of us speaking. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "I know it's over," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I know I messed everything up, and I've accepted that. But I can't go on like this, with everything between us so unfinished. I need closure, Lucas." "We both do." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. I wasn't sure what closure would look like for us. How do you find closure when the person who was supposed to be your partner in life betrays everything you thought you had? "I've been seeing a therapist," Sophie continued, her voice stronger now. "I've been trying to work through everything, what I did, why I did it. And I know I have a lot to answer for. But I also know that if we're going to raise Jason and Lily together, we need to at least try to find some common ground." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Sophie looked down, biting her lip. "I understand. But I'm trying, Lucas. I'm trying to be a better person, for the kids, for myself. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right, as much as I can." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Could I ever forgive her? Could we ever find a way to coexist without all the anger and resentment between us? "I don't know if we'll ever be friends again." Sophie, I said finally. But for the kids' sake, we'll figure it out. They deserve that much. She nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. Thank you. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As she left that night, I sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers again. The finality of it all still weighed heavy on me, but for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. But it was a path. And that was more than I had before. The months dragged on, each day blurring into the next. Sophie and I had settled into an uneasy truce, civil for the kids, distant otherwise. I kept busy with work and the kids' schedules, using the routines to distract myself from the lingering emptiness. But the weight of what happened never fully left me. It lurked in the quiet moments. Late at night when the house was silent, or when I dropped the kids off with Sophie, watching them run into her arms like nothing had changed. One evening, after dropping Jason and Lily at Sophie's, I found myself driving aimlessly around town, not ready to go back to the empty house. The radio hummed softly in the background, but I wasn't really listening. My mind kept circling the same thoughts: how things had fallen apart, what I could have done differently, and, most of all, what came next. I pulled into the parking lot of a local bar without really thinking about it. I hadn't been out socially in months. My nights were spent at home, wrapped up in the responsibilities of being a single parent. But tonight, I needed something different. A break from the routine. A moment to feel like I was more than just a father trying to keep it together. The bar was dimly lit, and the low murmur of conversation buzzed around me as I slid onto a stool at the bar. The bartender gave me a nod, recognizing me from years of living in the same small town. "What'll it be, Lucas?" "Whiskey. Straight," I said, my voice sounding rougher than usual. As I waited for my drink, I found myself looking around the bar, taking in the familiar faces. I didn't really know most of them, but there was a comfort in the familiarity of it all. These were people who had their own lives and their own struggles, but here, in this moment, we were all just trying to get through the day. The bartender set the glass in front of me, and I took a slow sip, feeling the warmth of the whiskey spread through me. For the first time in a long time, I let myself relax. The world outside could wait. "Hey, Lucas." I turned at the sound of my name, surprised to see Dave, an old friend from college, sliding onto the stool next to me. We hadn't seen much of each other since everything happened, but the sight of him brought a small, genuine smile to my face. "Dave, been a while." He nodded, signaling for a drink of his own. "Yeah, man, I've heard bits and pieces about what's been going on. You holding up?" I shrugged, not really knowing how to answer that. "Surviving, I guess. It's been rough." Dave took a sip of his beer, then looked at me seriously. "I can't imagine, man. I mean, I heard about Sophie and everything. But you're a good guy, Lucas. You didn't deserve any of that." His words caught me off guard. I'd been so caught up in the mess of everything that I hadn't really thought about it like that. It was easy to blame myself, to think about all the ways I could have been a better husband, a better partner. But hearing it from someone else, that maybe I wasn't the villain in this story, felt strangely liberating. "I guess I didn't," I said quietly. "But it happened anyway." Dave nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Life's like that sometimes. But you gotta remember who you are, man. Don't let this define you. You're more than what happened." The words stuck with me long after I left the bar that night. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time I started figuring out who I was without Sophie. Not just a father, not just a man scorned, but me. A few weeks after my conversation with Dave, I made a decision. It was time to stop living in the shadow of what Sophie had done. The divorce was finalized, the custody arrangement was in place, and life had settled into something resembling normalcy. But I wasn't the same person anymore. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. One afternoon, while the kids were at school, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I'd been putting this off for months, but I knew it was time. I logged into my email and clicked on the message from my lawyer that I had been avoiding, the one with the official divorce documents. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the button to download the documents. This was it, the final step in closing the door on everything that had been. Once I signed these papers, there would be no going back. With a deep breath, I clicked the button and opened the file. The words blurred in front of me for a moment, and I had to blink a few times to focus. It was all there in black and white: the division of assets, the custody agreement, the official end of our marriage. I scrolled to the bottom and placed the cursor over the signature line. My hand shook as I typed my name, the reality of it all hitting me like a tidal wave. But as I hit send, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. For the first time in months, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The chapter was closed. Sophie's betrayal, the anger, the sadness, it was all behind me now. There was nothing left to fight over, nothing left to mourn. It was just done. The next day, I picked the kids up from school, and we went out for ice cream, something we hadn't done in what felt like forever. Jason and Lily laughed and talked excitedly about their day, and I found myself genuinely smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. That evening, after putting them to bed, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Sophie used to sit. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the painful silence I had grown used to. It was peaceful. I thought about the future, about what life would look like from here on out. There was still a lot to figure out, still a lot of healing to do. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. Sophie and I would never be the same, and that was okay. I didn't need her to be a part of my life to move forward. I had my kids, I had my work, and most importantly, I had myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Months had passed since I signed the final divorce papers. In the beginning, the thought of moving forward without Sophie weighed heavily on me. But the weight lifted slowly, piece by piece, as time wore on. Jason and Lily were doing better, and I found myself starting to enjoy the moments I spent with them. The wounds were still there, but they were healing, like old scars that didn't hurt as much anymore. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the kids were over at Sophie's for the weekend. I had the house to myself, which still felt strange, but I'd gotten used to it. I decided to head to the park for a run. Running had become my therapy, a way to clear my mind and release all the pent-up frustration. It was a kind of meditation, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement, the steady intake of breath. It was simple, but it worked. As I jogged through the park, I spotted a familiar figure by the tennis courts. Sophie. She was there with Jason and Lily, watching as they tried their best to play the game they had come to love. Jason, in particular, had taken to tennis ever since his time watching Sophie train with Evan. Ironic, I thought, but maybe the kid needed something positive to cling to. I stopped at a distance, watching them from the shade of a nearby tree. Sophie looked different, more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. She was laughing with the kids, showing them how to swing their rackets properly. It was a simple, wholesome scene, the kind I used to imagine for us when we first started a family. It stirred something inside me, a bittersweet longing for what could have been. But it didn't hurt the way it used to. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. She had made her choices, and so had I. The life we once shared was over, but something new was beginning. I continued my run, letting the past fall behind me with every step. After my run, I stopped by a coffee shop on my way home. I hadn't been back to this place in months, too many memories of afternoons spent here with Sophie and the kids. But today, I felt ready. The small bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee washed over me, bringing back flashes of better days. I placed my order and found a table by the window, sipping my coffee as I watched the world pass by outside. It felt good to sit here, alone but not lonely. I didn't miss the chaos or the tension that had filled my life before. This quiet, this stillness, it was what I needed now. Lucas? The sound of my name startled me. I looked up to see a woman standing by my table, a surprised smile on her face. It took me a moment to recognize her, Erica, one of the parents from Jason's soccer team. We'd talked a few times on the sidelines, but I hadn't seen her since everything with Sophie had gone public. Erica, hey, I said, standing up to greet her. She smiled warmly, gesturing to the seat across from me. Mind if I join you? Not at all, I said, gesturing for her to sit. We made small talk for a few minutes, how Jason was doing in soccer, and how her son, Tyler, was excelling in school. It felt good to have a normal conversation, one that didn't revolve around the mess of my personal life. But eventually, the subject shifted. I heard about what happened with you and Sophie, Erica said gently, her eyes full of sympathy. I'm really sorry, Lucas. I can't imagine how hard it's been. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Yeah, it was rough. But we're getting through it. The kids are doing okay, and I'm moving on, I guess. Erica smiled softly. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. It's not easy, what you've been through. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd been caught up in the anger and the pain, feeling like I had to stay strong for the kids, for myself. But at this moment, hearing someone else acknowledge, it made the burden feel a little lighter. We talked for a while longer, and before I knew it, we had exchanged numbers. There was no expectation, no pressure, it was just nice to have someone to talk to, someone who understood what it was like to juggle parenting and the aftermath of a broken marriage. As I left the coffee shop that day, I couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. Maybe this was what moving on really looked like, small, unexpected moments of connection that reminded you life could be good again. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about finding a way to live with it and still be open to what came next. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, staring up at the stars. The weight of the past still lingered, but it didn't feel so heavy anymore. I was beginning to see the path forward, not just for me, but for Jason and Lily, too. Life was starting to make sense again, piece by piece. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. The following weeks moved by in a blur of routine, work, picking up the kids from school, weekend soccer games, but for the first time in a long while, the numbness had started to wear off. Life was beginning to feel normal again. Or at least, my version of it. Jason and Lily had adjusted to the new custody arrangement with surprising resilience. They were spending more time with Sophie now, and while things between us remained civil, the lingering tension never fully disappeared. Still, we made it work for the kids' sake. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, sorting through bills, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Erica. Erica, hey, I know this is last minute, but Tyler and I are heading to the park tomorrow with some of the other parents. Thought you and the kids might want to join. I stared at the message for a moment, feeling a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a while. Interest. She had been checking in on me every now and then since we ran into each other at the coffee shop. We kept it friendly, texts here and there, mostly about the kids, but there was a quiet warmth in her messages that I found myself looking forward to. After a moment's hesitation, I typed out a response. Me, sounds good. Jason has soccer in the morning, but we'll head over afterward. The next day, I took Jason and Lily to the park. They were excited, running ahead of me to meet their friends. The park was filled with parents chatting and laughing as their kids played in the jungle gym or kicked around a soccer ball. I spotted Erica near the picnic tables, her son Tyler playing with a group of boys. She waved when she saw me, and I made my way over. Hey, glad you could make it, she said with a smile. Thanks for the invite, I replied. Settling into the moment, we spent the next hour chatting while the kids played. It was easy, comfortable. No awkward pauses or forced conversation. Erica was good at making people feel at ease, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of everything that had happened with Sophie hanging over me. At some point, Lily came running over, her face flushed from playing. Dad, can we stay a little longer? Please? I glanced at Erica, who smiled. We'll be here for a while. No rush. I nodded to Lily. Yeah, we can stay. The sun dipped lower in the sky as the evening wore on. Erica and I sat on the edge of a bench, watching as the kids made up their own games, laughing and chasing each other. It was peaceful, watching them enjoy something so simple, so pure. Look at them, Erica said softly. They're so resilient, aren't they? No matter what happens in their lives, they just bounce back. Yeah, I agreed, my eyes on Jason and Lily. They're stronger than we give them credit for. She turned to me, her gaze gentle but serious. And so are you, Lucas. I know you've been through hell, but you're still here. You're still showing up for your kids. That says a lot. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with regret. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I didn't come here to ask for pity, she continued, her voice breaking. I wanted to apologize. I never should have done what I did. I destroyed our family. I destroyed us. And now I'm paying the price. There it was. The apology I had once longed for but never thought I'd actually hear. For months, I had been consumed by anger and hurt, reliving the moment I found out about her and Evan. Replaying the betrayal over and over in my mind. I had wanted her to feel the pain she caused me, to understand what it was like to lose everything. But now that she was standing here, confessing her regret, it didn't feel the way I thought it would. It didn't bring the satisfaction or closure I expected. Instead, it felt hollow. I'm sorry, too, I finally said, surprising myself. Sorry that things ended the way they did. But what's done is done. There's no going back. She nodded slowly, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. I know. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. There was so much we could have said to each other, but I didn't want to dig up old wounds. I had already spent enough time trying to move past the pain. Lucas, she said softly, breaking the silence. Can we at least try to be civil? For the kid's sake? I met her gaze, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the woman I had once fallen in love with, not the stranger she had become during the affair. But the mother of my children, the person I had built a life with. Of course, I said. We'll always be connected through Jason and Lily. We can't change that. Relief flickered in her eyes. Thank you. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she hesitated. Lucas, I just want you to know that I'm really trying to make things right. I want to be better for them. For Jason and Lily. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. I didn't know if she could ever fully repair the damage she had caused. But for the kid's sake, I hoped she was telling the truth. As she walked out the door, I closed it behind her and leaned against it, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The conversation had dredged up emotions I thought I had buried, anger, sadness, even a sliver of forgiveness. But the one thing I hadn't expected to feel was a sense of peace. I had made my peace with the past. What Sophie did was unforgivable, but I didn't need her apology to move on. I had already started to build a new life. One that didn't revolve around the pain she had caused. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As I stood there in the quiet of the house, I realized something important. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I didn't know what the future held for me or for Sophie, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to let go. The summer heat lingered in the early September air as I stood outside, watching Jason and Lily play in the yard. They chased each other, laughing. Their voices filled with the kind of joy that had been missing for too long. It had been months since Sophie had shown up at my doorstep, and since then, things had finally settled into a rhythm, one that felt like it might actually last. The divorce was final. I had full custody of the kids, with Sophie getting visitation rights every other weekend. She had found a small apartment nearby, and though our interactions were still strained, we managed to keep things civil for Jason and Lily's sake. They seemed to be adjusting well, though I knew there were still scars beneath the surface, ones that might take a lifetime to fully heal. As I watched them play, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Erica. Erica, hey, we're having a barbecue at the park tomorrow. You and the kids should come. I smiled, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Erica had been a constant presence these last few months. What had started as a simple friendship had grown into something more. Something I hadn't expected but was grateful for. I typed a quick response. We'll be there. Setting the phone down, I turned my attention back to the kids, who were now climbing onto the treehouse in the far corner of the yard. It had been a project Sophie and I had started before everything fell apart, but I had finished it alone, turning it into a refuge for Jason and Lily. A place where they could escape, even if just for a little while. I walked over and called up to them. You two be careful up there. Dad, we're fine. Jason called back, grinning down at me. We're gonna be ninjas. Lily giggled, and I couldn't help but smile. Their resilience still amazed me. Despite everything that had happened, they found ways to keep going, to keep laughing. It reminded me that I could, too. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of contentment settle over me. It wasn't perfect. Life never is, but for the first time in what felt like forever. I was okay with that. The days of bitterness and revenge were behind me. I had spent too much time consumed by anger, driven by the need to make Sophie pay for what she had done. But in the end, all that mattered was finding peace, for myself and for my kids. I had come to realize that revenge wasn't the solution. It had only prolonged the pain. What truly mattered was what came next. As I stood there, watching Jason and Lily beneath the fading light, I knew that this was the beginning of something new. I had a chance to rebuild, not just for myself, but for them. And for the first time, I wasn't weighed down by the past. I had let go of the anger, the hurt, and the need for retribution. The future wasn't something I feared anymore. It was something I looked forward to. Tomorrow, we'd go to the barbecue, and Erica would be there, and maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting for me in that new chapter of my life. Something that wasn't defined by the mistakes of the past but by the hope of what was still to come. I turned back to the house, calling the kids inside for dinner. As they scrambled down from the treehouse, laughing and chasing each other, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude wash over me. We were going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And that was enough.